Welcome back to our viewers. Welcome back to the marine insurance claims in the COVID-19 era. In this panel, this is the last panel out of this two-day event. In this panel, we will be discussing about the case of the insurance claim. We have damaged goods, container ship fires. We've seen things like that being on the rise. We've seen the latest Allianz safety review highlighting some of these issues. The pandemic has heightened the risk environment around the high value and temperature sensitive goods as well. We have lockdown measures, we've seen that in the past. And we've seen the industry affected in a number of ways. For those who operate in the Far East, China, example, the crisis now is on the 10th month. Maybe for some others, 7 months, maybe a little bit more. But this is almost a year now, maybe less than a year. And we are not sure when the crisis, when this whole pandemic will be restored back to the normality we had at the end of 2019. Now, we would like to discuss the marine insurance claims. And in this panel, we are joined by John Donald. John is the Loss Prevention Deputy Director of the Standard Club. Eva Ioannidou. Eva is the Senior Claims Executive of the UK P&I Club here in Greece. Gordon Robertson. Gordon is the Director of the North of England in Greece. And Elena Souli. Elena is the Regional Business Development Director and FTD Manager for Piraeus for the American Club. So I would like to welcome all our panelists, and I would like to right away give the opportunity to the panelists to raise their concern with their opening statements, starting with Elena.
Hello, Apostolos, and thank you very much for your kind invitation. It's indeed a privilege to participate in such a panel with reputable colleagues from the other IG clubs. At the outset, may I say that obviously the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic had influenced a lot our day-to-day life and shipping industry at the most. What it's though important to know is that shipping industry has once more elaborated and demonstrated rather its ability to adjust, not without significant losses, as this was unprecedented times that we are living through, but generally speaking, I believe that our industry was one of the few that have been able to adapt to a new environment rather quickly. Coming now to our discussion in relation to the insurance claims that resulted out of the pandemic, of the outbreak of the pandemic. From the club's perspective and what we have seen so far, it's that there are a couple of segments that have been hit more firmly than others when it comes to significant claims. The first one is the cruising industry. We have seen that there has been a lot of reported cases on many cruise vessels. Obviously, the impact in such an occasion is huge, as you can appreciate when you have 3,000 passengers on board the vessel and more than 1,000 seafarers and admin employees on board. In order to safeguard the health of everybody on board and try to go through the applications of guaranteeing and so forth, that is the extent is huge, and I'm afraid that the impact on the cruise industry is going to continue for quite some time. The sales of the cruise vessels when it comes to passengers will be hit significantly, and particularly the Asian market, as we have seen that this was one of the most significant markets that have been supported the cruise industry. On another aspect, I would say that we have also seen that the container shipping industry has also been hit significantly. And that's mainly due to the congestion at ports that has been the imminent result of the outbreak of the pandemic all over the world, starting from the Asian port, and now it has been affected to all ports, most of the ports around the globe. So all these significant delays in the operation of the container vessels, and in most occasions these container vessels carry out some very sensitive cargo. So delays on discharge of this cargo, in many occasions we are talking about refrigerated cargo, that are significant losses that had a huge impact. And we will also see that on a pool level amongst the IG clubs. So for me, at the outset, I would just like to highlight what's the factors that have been heavily affected by this pandemic.
Thank you, Elena. Gordon?
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Apostolos, for having us all here. It's very much appreciated to have the opportunity. Couldn't really agree more than with what Elena said. Obviously, the cruise sector has been hit hardest. That's not an area we're particularly exposed to. We don't have many, if any, cruise ships on the books. The liner trades undoubtedly have been hit very hard, and for a number of different reasons, really. You know, you've got the issues with damage to sensitive and perishable goods, and it's so easy to try and blame the ship or the carrier, if you like, for those problems, when in actual fact, you know, a small delay somewhere else in the chain has probably caused the issue. I mean, you know, it's not the carrier's fault that there's congestion in the ports, or that, you know, they might have had to have delays because changes in routes, or crew changes, or issues like that, or quarantine issues, which you know, weren't probably foreseen, you know, more than 10 months ago. You know, there's issues with vessels having to deviate between ports, which obviously causes various problems for the liner trades. And you know, something that's, you know, probably a bit more practical is the fact that, you know, the fruit pickers, for instance, you know, aren't necessarily at work. You're not able to get the produce, the perishable, high-value produce, out of the fields and into the containers fast enough to get it to destination. So very often you can see cargoes being stuffed in containers hot, and not being chilled properly before they're going into the containers, and this, you know, resulting in claims at the other end. And if there's any mistake at any point on behalf of the ship, or a lack of documentation, it's very easy to try and pin these sorts of claims on the ship and the carrier, rather than, you know, looking to where, you know, what really caused the problem. So I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of issues around those sorts of delays, as well. There's documentary problems that we've got, because, you know, obviously people are trying to fast track the release of cargo, so they're you know, changing the rules on what documents need to be present when you collect your container and that sort of thing, and that's not always helpful from a P&I cover perspective, as we like to bills of lading to be present when people hand over cargo, and of course there's always the chance that the reason that the cargo is still sitting in the port is because the bill of lading hasn't arrived yet at the destination, so someone isn't able to go and pick up their container, because there's been delays, you know, all over the shop really for this sort of thing. And I think the other problem that we have is that, you know, what's the alternative at the moment? If someone can't move something by container, and they thought they could, they try and stick it on an aeroplane. Airplanes are very expensive, and there's an alternative. You know, they're probably going to then try and bring that claim against, you know, claim for that against the carrier and the club. You know, if they already had a contract in place for carrying something else. So there's a lot of challenges out there, and I think really the liner trade is going to bear the brunt of things.
Okay. Eva, you can double click to, yeah, you can double click, yeah.
Yes, that's my presentation. I was thinking that it would be nice to have my view of what were the extra issues, not only on cargo matters, but as well on people claims issues. We're dealing with people. All the vessels are full of people and seamen, and the problems are particularly important when it comes to the problems that we have faced and we're still facing due to COVID. So I think that the main problem we are dealing as PNIs, and I think it's for the whole IG PNIs, is the medical disembarkation. I appreciate the financial impact of the problems raised by COVID due to cargo on cargo matters, but it is also important to see and find out special and emergency situations where we need to disembark seamen due to COVID or not due to COVID for other illnesses, and the difficulties that we're facing on that aspect, which are problems with medical disembarkation, problems with treatment. We were not allowed, in my experience, in several countries around the world, most of the countries around the world, we had issues to treat them, or even disembark them, or even examine them. We had issues in respect of repatriate them when it was they were ready to be repatriated or fit. We couldn't find a way to assist them when they had problems like not only with the illness, but also with an injury, and they needed emergency evacuation. That, of course, exploded the cost of treatment, exploded the cost of repatriation, the cost of medical evacuation. We also had problems with commercial flights. I personally couldn't find medical escorts. The last 10 months, I had the chance only twice to have a medical escort to accompany seamen, sick seamen. And of course, the main problems, which definitely causes financial problems with, in the shipping industry, it's the quarantine, the problems with the loss of hire due to quarantine, the problems in the event there is a COVID positive seaman on board and the vessel can't take the free pratique to discharge or load the cargo. In several cases I've seen Chinese ports or Asian ports to have the problem that the free pratique was not given for 20 or 30 days due to a dead body on board or due to a COVID positive seaman on board. That, of course, increased the costs, not only for the P&I, but for the member as well, operational costs extra. Problems like ethical problems, like we couldn't repatriate a corpse, a dead seaman. The family didn't want to be cremated, but only embalming, but we couldn't do it. And issues that the owners were also had to bear operational costs, like quarantine costs prior and after, prior embarkation or after disembarkation, 14 days before or 14 days prior, after disembarkation, crew changes, one other issue. there are no several places around the world, ports that crew changes can be made easily, or crew changes are allowed. So plenty of ship owners had to deviate, and costs like extra medical costs. So I don't think it's only the matter of cargo issues. It's also several operational costs and sometimes loss of hire or loss of earning due to the quarantine and due to the restrictions, COVID restrictions made by several countries. Of course, the IG Club and the World Health, the IG Committee, the World Health Organization, and other bodies tried to impose to plenty of governments around the world that they should allow people to be treated. They should allow seamen to be treated, and that shouldn't be. It's their obligation at the end of the day, but it's not easy to convince them at the moment. That's all from me.
Okay, thank you very much, Eva. There's it's like a logo from the IMO saying seafarers are key workers. We should promote seafarers as humans, because what you described, and it was also mentioned in previous panels by other persons who are working for ship operators, they have huge problems of this medical disembarkation. And one of the questions I would like to ask, and I would like to hear from all of you, I'll let John speak. And one question I would like to come back with is the charter clauses. If you have any sort of problems, because it's an issue, there are charter clauses asking for the ship operators not to affect any sort of crew changes. And I'd like to get back with it and discuss it in the next round of questions. John, your thoughts to conclude this first round of feedback. Your thoughts.
Thank you, Apostolos. Thank you. Very privileged to be here amongst this group. First of all, I should say that I joined the club 5 years ago into loss prevention, but before that, I came from a ship owner, ship manager background. So I'm coming from more the ship operation side rather than a pure insurer here. So when it comes to discussing the clauses, I'll happily let that to my legal friends here on the panel. But on a day-to-day basis, I and my colleagues in loss prevention, we sit between the underwriters and the claims. So we're doing risk assessments, pre-risk assessments all of the time, and when we're for the underwriters, and when we're not doing that, we're helping out the claims people on what happened, what went wrong, advice to members, this kind of work. So we have a ringside seat at the day-to-day claims that are presented at club. And as Eva, Elena, and Robert have just pointed out, it is a very, very challenging environment right now. So I'll happily sign off at that point. I look forward to sharing the experience that we have from loss prevention in the most interesting discussion I'm sure we'll have. Thank you.
Okay, now before we move on into other questions, I would like to go back. What's your feedback with the charterers clauses I just mentioned earlier on, asking the ship operators not to affect any sort of crew changes? What's your view so far? Do you have any cases like that? Have you been asked by your clients for guidance, etc.? Elena.
Yes, obviously that's a very hot topic, or maybe a hot potato that nobody wants to touch upon these days. But what needs to be highlighted is that charterers need to appreciate that the seafarer service on board cannot be extended indefinitely. We had occasions where seafarers have been on board for more than 12 months, and that is important not only for humanitarian and regulatory compliance considerations, but also due to the fact that this would result in an increased risk of fatigue and mental health of the seafarers aboard, and eventually this could render a vessel unseaworthy. And in those occasions, we may reach, the occasion where this could result in a big casualty, a very serious event that could jeopardize both owners and charterers' reputation to that front. So having that in mind, obviously there has been a lot of discussion and debate between owners and charterers as to who is to be accountable as responsible for the cost of crew changes, especially in occasions where the owners have to deviate to another port because the port that actually charterers have ordered the vessel to call won't allow for crew changes. And we have seen that this has been the case in many occasions with the liner services. No, there are not many options. One vessel goes in the liner service, so it calls the same ports all the time. So I think that has created a lot of frustration, and we have the BIMCO clause that has tried actually to put an end to this debate, by calling upon the charterers to actually take some action and agree to take some burden from the owner's shoulder, so to speak, in terms of contributing to the cost or not putting the vessel off hire. But obviously the commercial consideration as to whether the charterers are going to accept such clause or not during this recession that it's right now due to the COVID, that I'm afraid it's another discussion and has to do with the balance of the commercial needs. However, I think that there's a wide promotion from the industry towards the key workers, as you said, Apostolos, of the shipping industry, which are recognized to be the seafarers these days. So hopefully there's going to be more pressure on charterers to agree and collaborate, because otherwise the other point is that owners would say that this is a lawful deviation of saving life, especially in case where we're talking about mental health. Which is equally important, and it's also a matter, as I said, of keeping a vessel seaworthy. Obviously, a seafarer that has been on board a vessel more than 12 months, it's an incident. It's an incident itself. It's a ticking bomb. It may cause some serious incident on board due to this fatigue. So yes, we have been asked by owners to assist with relevant clause. Obviously, our recommendation is the use of BIMCO clause, but sometimes we just have to work on drafting some other clause, trying to ease this difference between owners and charterers.
For the remaining of the panel who has not asked, I would like to also add some, not oil to the fire. I would just like to say, we have cases where we have long-time charters in effect prior to the pandemic, so there's no such provision on these time charters and on this issue. And again, Eva mentioned in her presentation something about loss of hire, because you have to deviate at the end of the day, and you all understand there's a huge financial loss for all the parties involved for a number of issues. And I have to just remind to our audience and to the panelists, anything in excess of 12 months, it's a violation of MLC, among other things. Among other things, okay, it's violation of the, I'm not saying, I'm not against, I fully agree. I'm just saying it's also violating the MLC if we exceed the 12 months. So among other things, we are violating legislation here. It's not a matter of I feel, you feel, we all feel, and we come together and agree. So we are violating some sort of legislation. Gordon, your thoughts on this?
Well, I think Alina's the FD&D lawyer here, so we will we will follow her mainly on these topics. But our guys have been advising on clauses right from the very beginning. Advising on the force majeure provisions, who bears the time and cost for all these things, and crew changes, following crew changes when there's problems, changes in quarantine rules, all this sort of thing that's going on. And I think the thing you need to we all need to remember that when it comes to the clauses, you've got two different situations. You've got the market that's developed since COVID, so they're aware of COVID and they're trying to draft clauses and incorporate clauses that share the responsibilities or set out who is responsible for these sorts of delays and costs. And then there are the charter parties that were in existence before and didn't take COVID into consideration probably very much at all. And so there's a variety of legal challenges on that first, on both sides really. It's almost harder probably for the older charter parties, the long-term time TCs that are in operation that haven't taken any of this into consideration, because the problem isn't going away. And it's something that needs to be dealt with. But the industry has adapted and found routes through this in the past. We had similar problems with Iran and sanctions clauses in the past, where sanctions crept up on people and people didn't realize. And these are the sorts of issues that the shipping industry deals with continuously over time. The commercial side of it is that crew changes are something practical that need to happen. So on the spot market, in the charters going forward, we would hope that people are incorporating clauses and being open and with everyone that they're contracting with as to what they need and what they're going to need to do during the period of a charter. And hopefully then you can avoid the problems. You can incorporate something to make sure you can keep your crew safe and perform your crew changes and work out who's going to be responsible for it. The industry will adapt to these sorts of things, but unfortunately, in the meantime, the lawyers will probably also make quite a lot of money during the adaptation phase. I think would be the point to make there.
Yes. I cannot agree more, especially for the last comment, the last line you said. Eva, your thoughts? I mean, we're talking about crew changes. Your thoughts?
I know that, of course, there is the BIMCO clause, and as Gordon said, the industry at the end of the day will adapt in a way or another, not only on long TCs, but on voyage charter parties, etc. But we should be reminded as well that it's not only the MLC, it's the violation of MLC that would cause problems with the flag state as well, since the flag state provides the owner with the DMLC certificate, the compliance with MLC, and thus would be a problem not only for the owner, but for the charterer as well, in the event there is a problem with the flag state. So I know, and at the beginning, the flag state and the ITF, most of the flag states and the ITF had agreed, not in a way, in an unofficial way, not to challenge the expired contracts which are after 6 months or 9 months, and have an allowance of 3 months, I assume 3 months outmost. But now I think that most of the owners are trying to adapt, and most of the charterers are trying to adapt to this aspect. It's no way, there is no other way but to allow the seamen to go back home. So not only for fatigue issues, but as Alina said, for hazards and risks that can happen on board due to fatigue, due to mental problems, due to several other problems, and due to the fact that the ship needs to maintain their flag state, the DMLC certificates, and be in accordance with the MLC.
Okay.
That can be avoided.
Yeah. John, your thoughts?
I'm going to take a slightly unconventional view and a different perspective here, partly because I used to be a charter as well as working for an owner in the background. The popular view, of course, is that a charter party, a charter is a transaction. In other words, the owner wins, the charterer wins, the owner loses. So it's a kind of adversarial discussion. But the reality is, and maybe my naive view here, but the reality is that every charter, and particularly a time charter, is a joint venture, and the charter and the owner has just as much interest in the success of the voyage as anybody involved in the process. And therefore, it is in the charter's interest as much as the owner to ensure that the owner has a healthy, happy morale, high morale, motivated crew on board. And if he doesn't, then the charter is equally exposed to the downside here. Therefore, I would like to see charters for sure taking a much, much more engaged and helpful collaborative approach to this. The cases that are often cited in the media right now where charters take a hard-nosed business, hands-off, objective approach is just simply unacceptable in this environment. The crew and the performance of the crew, even at the humanitarian level, the mental health of the crew is most certainly a charterer's responsibility also, and they have to cooperate to get the guys on and off the vessels as expeditiously as possible, and without being too aggressively commercially about it. That's my view.
Yeah, I cannot agree more on what you said, because it can be no other way. It should be a joint venture. Fully
It
agree.
is that, yes.
Fully agree with what you said. Now, I would like to ask, my next question is about how do you think the crisis, this unprecedented crisis, has affected the operation of the ship? In how many ways? In which ways do you think the crisis has affected? And I'm sure that we're talking about the mental wellness and the crew welfare. Absolutely, it has been affected. Humans have been at the center of the safety. So in that sense, safety of the ships has been affected. And I'm also like to also inject over here the issue of cyber safety. Digitization has been taken a big boost during this crisis. We've seen operations going remotely. We have remote inspections, remote surveys. Have you heard anything like that from your clients? Have they asked for your assistance? In which ways you think that this crisis has affected positively or negatively the operation of the ships and the insurance sector in general? Elena.
That's a very good point concerning the cybersecurity, because having discussed a little bit on the crew and the fatigue arising out of a long stay on board the vessel, as you can appreciate from a practical term, the day-to-day life of a seafarer who has been extensively staying aboard is to spend all his free time on the internet, trying to be connected, to stay connected with family and friends. So he's going to be the weak link there in case there is a sophisticated scam attack. As you can appreciate, he cannot be fully aware of the risks at that moment where he's very tired. He just wants to keep in contact with his family, and suddenly an email pops up which contains a scam. Most probably he's going to click on it, especially when it's COVID related and highlights some issues concerning COVID safety or whatever. We know that you know, the scammers are always on top of developments, and they're all very sophisticated these days. So I think the combination of the two, of you know, seafarers fatigue and increased cyber attacks, especially throughout the lockdown periods and the breakdown of the pandemic, are indeed very crucial. So, you know, we have to keep the seafarers on top of things, and the situation with prolonged stays on board doesn't help. And then on the other side, obviously, we have people in the shipping industry. A lot of them are also working remotely these days. And when you are not in the office, but you are at home, I would say that you can find yourself less alerted in terms of cybersecurity threats when you are trying to you're not in the office environment. And as we know, the weak link on the cybersecurity is the human factor. Which, due of the current circumstances, I think it contributes further to the increase of cyber attacks.
Outdoors, we've seen the incident of Huacasio, the vessel who has run aground in Mauritius.
Mm-hmm.
In reports in the press stating that the vessel deviated from its planned route because of the crew would like to get a better signal, to get back
Yes.
signal in order to communicate with their homes.
Yeah, because that's what counts to the daily life of the seafarers that are currently stuck on board a vessel.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Gordon, your thoughts on this?
Well, if that is indeed the case of what happened on the Wakashio, and I think we should probably wait until we've got some formal investigations carried out in that area. But it wouldn't.
I would just like to say, due to the fact that this is, I'm not saying we shouldn't wait. I'm just saying the vessel deviated from its planned route, and this gives adequate reason for the vessel to deviate. And we've seen statements from the crew stating that something like this happened. I'm sure we have to wait for the investigation. I'm not saying it's the only reason. I'm just saying the crew thought it would be a good.
I think that the point.
The press.
Yeah, the point to make here, Apo, is that in actual fact, it wouldn't be the first casualty that happened as a result of that sort of thing. We've probably all seen in the past a number of route changes that have resulted in casualties that, why did you decide to go that way? Well, we were closer to shore and the crew had phone signal. We certainly in our loss prevention department have, an example which no doubt is based on a real casualty. Don't know whether it was one of ours or just a well-known casualty. Just to use as an example and explain to people that even if you are going to make these sorts of changes to the voyage plan, you need to do it properly and conduct a proper risk assessment and look at what you're doing. It's not necessarily that it's a problem that you're doing that, but if you're going to do something, do it properly. Going back onto cyber, which I think was more the topic of the previous panel, but as that's where we've ended up, undoubtedly, our seafarers are at risk from cyber attacks. They're in a difficult situation anyway. Then we throw COVID on top of them as well, and it all comes down to their training and what they know about and what they're aware of. And I think all of the clubs here are signed up to sponsor Be Cyber Aware at Sea, and encourage all of our seafarers to educate themselves about cyber attacks, because the cyber attacks are not necessarily just against the ship, they're against the individuals and the people on board as well, and they can be very harrowing for individuals on board the ship. And it's probably easier to get a hold of someone remotely in a sort of cyber attack way when someone is feeling worried, anxious, nervous. So I mean, the crews are undoubtedly even more exposed than they would have been normally to that sort of thing. And it's all a matter of training and crew well-being and looking after your crew and making sure that they're happy on board and that they're able to communicate with their family and stay in touch with people.
Yeah. Eva, your thoughts?
I definitely agree with Gordon. It's a matter of human need to have to communicate with the family, to communicate with their friends, being stuck there for more than 9 or 12 months, being worried about their families in places like where the COVID was in extreme pandemic, let's say, crisis, and they were worried about their families, they're worried about their friends. And I'm sure that cyber attacks, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Oh,
yeah.
Okay. And I'm sure that cyber attacks are one of the issues that all ship owners and ships are facing now. But as Gordon said and Elena said, I believe that due to safety aspects, due to the ISM procedures, due to special ISPS procedures as well, all of the crew members are aware what they should do and what they should not in order to avoid cyber attacks. I haven't seen any, by the way. I mean, I didn't experience something like that at the moment, up to now, for the last 10 months.
When you say you haven't seen anyone, I mean
As a case, I mean
clients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From our vendors.
Yeah. I think one of the key concerns about cybersecurity. I'm repeating this over the course of the last 2 years. If you go to other industries, it's a mandatory requirement. It's a regulatory requirement to report these incidents. In shipping, there's no such regulatory requirement to report cyber incidents. And it's exactly the opposite. No one says anything about it. And there are cases in real life. But since the majority of the operators are not insured against these risks, no one says anything. And this cannot move the industry forward as long as we do not share any sort of feedback. That's why I think officially we will never hear anything. I think so. That's the key reason. So it's one of the gray areas with respect to cyber safety. I think that we don't have any such of reporting scheme or anything like that. But I think the industry will adapt. As I think we all agree, the industry will adapt in the long run. But there's an issue. I fully understand when you say you haven't heard or seen any sort of cyber safety incident. Yes, John, your thoughts on how the industry is affected by COVID? You have to unmute. You have to unmute, John.
Sorry, apologies for that. I pressed it twice. Just on the cyber point, before we move on, from a practical perspective, I've had two conversations with pilots, port pilots, in the last 6 months independently, and they've just remarked that masters now approaching anchorages are more concerned about where they anchor for good quality signal, wireless signal, than they are for the quality of the anchorage position itself. So that's an indication of just how essential the signal and internet access actually is. As regards to the Wakashio, nothing would surprise me there. It sounds quite plausible that they did indeed deviate to get a signal, but it would be premature really to make the conclusion along that front. But it is a major aspect. On a more practical level, we at Charles Taylor, the managers of the Standard Club, we receive, I'm not absolutely certain of my figure here, but so I'm going to underestimate it, but we receive about many tens of thousands of email phishing attempts every month into our company. That's the scale of the problem that we as an insurer are exposed to. So it doesn't surprise me that the number of attempts are being, and each one of us, I'm quite certain, must receive a few personally each day. I do, I'm certain anyway. So it's ubiquitous now, and it is a great concern for sure. So mariners are indeed exposed. And Elena, she said, they are a captive audience now on board the Mariner. Weakened, they're dependent, they're highly anxious, and therefore the risks associated with phishing attempts or similar scams is enormous. It's incumbent upon the ship owners and the ship managers to constantly try to raise awareness. We in the clubs, we're all trying to do our part in that, but ultimately it is the ship manager and the crew members themselves that are the best line of defense here.
Yeah, in the previous panel on cybersecurity, one of the panelists mentioned there are 3 types of organizations: those who have been attacked, those who have been attacked and they don't know it, and those who have been attacked and will be attacked in the future. So
I wouldn't disagree with all that. I would not disagree.
I'm just saying it's part of life. I fully agree. And
yeah.
in a number of ways, it could be someone is hacking your mobile device, and from that device can go to other systems. But we all understand with respect to cyber risk, there are a number of risks and elements involved over there. Now, I would like to ask, my next question is, do you see any sort of alarming trends, either due to COVID or without COVID? I mean, do you see any sort of alarming trends with respect to claims you have from your clients in any way? I know that the industry has an issue with container ship fires. I understand, we understand the issue of the crew wellness. There's a case for medical evacuations now. It's a huge case, huge concern regarding COVID. Do you see any sort of alarming trend? This is what I would like to hear from you. I'm not saying you should, if you don't have, I'm not asking for specific numbers, but any sort of alarming trend. Elena.
I wouldn't say that's it's an alarming trend, but what we have seen more often than before is requests to assist our members on an occasion where, due to the banks have been closed for considerable time at 1/3 of the world, mainly due to the lockdown. As Gordon mentioned before, the bill of lading has not been easily processed, and it wouldn't arrive on time at the discharge port. So what our ship owner operators have been calling us is very frequently on a daily basis, I would say, is to help them and to assist them with drafting LOIs, as charters would request them to discharge the cargo without production of original bills. Obviously, there's an imminent risk there of misdelivery of cargo, especially during the whole turnaround of the COVID pandemic, where things were appearing more complicated. It was very difficult to get identifications of people, and obviously there was the risk that they could potentially prejudice their P&I cover. So this we have seen on a daily basis. Thankfully, so far all went well. We didn't have a misdelivery case reported, at least from our end. But we have seen the need to accommodate the commercial considerations of the trading partners, being the owners and the charterers. And obviously there was a significant need for FD&D advice on the drafting of clauses, or even amended some existing clauses to deal with COVID-related issues, crew changes being one of those. And I think collectively the IG group have been very good in drafting and putting together the IG subcommittee to work on the various scenarios that were coming on a daily basis from the different clubs, in order to assure consistency in the response on the IG level.
Yeah. Gordon?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, on the P&I front, we're probably not yet seeing, other than the people side, the sort of spike in claims that might potentially come from COVID. FD&D has obviously seen a much greater level of advice that they're putting out to people, and the sort of disputes that there are out there surrounding COVID and the problems that it's causing. But in terms of the other insurers, I think the hull and machinery guys are probably a bit more insulated so far from the whole situation, but they're probably starting to thinking about what's going to happen over the next few years as we see vessels coming out of layup, and whether they whether everything's being done properly for reactivation. They're probably also concerned about the problems people have had in getting spare parts to vessels, and whether they've had to tighten their belts in terms of spares and that sort of thing. So I think there's probably a few more concerns on the hull and machinery side, but again, we've not necessarily seen those claims coming through yet. There's a slightly sort of longer tail on that. I'm sure as well that the loss of hire insurers are probably a lot more susceptible to the disruption caused by COVID, because critical spare parts, the planes aren't flying. You can't get spares around the world the way you could before COVID. But we've seen a lot of people put in change the wording of their policies, but in stop losses for COVID related issues on the loss of hire front. So I think it's going to take a bit of time before we see exactly what claims are going to come out of COVID, other than on the people side, the immediate people problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Eva?
I think that Annelina and Gordon are right. And The most important trend, alarming trend, would be the people's matter, the seafarers' well-being, and the problems raised out of it, and the problems with their own mental health or not. And the latest trend that I can spot from my experience in handling issues with charter parties as well, is the how to safeguard the inquiries received, is how to ensure and safeguard that the members, as we said previously, the members' position in respect of crew changes and in respect of quarantines and in respect of the problematic issues on ports where the WHO considered as being on pandemic and on infectious disease, etc. Most of the inquiries received is in this respect. Charter parties and clauses that be prepared and let's say, proposed to charterers in a way that they will ensure and safeguard members' position, owners' position for the deviation, the crew deviation, and the effects of a quarantine, 14 days quarantine or 20 days quarantine.
Yeah, yeah. John, your thoughts?
Yes, I would agree with all that's been said before. Operating a ship, who would be a ship owner or ship manager these days? It is a very, very challenging environment. And of course, Eva, you're quite correct that the crew issue is front and central. It is the big issue. But a corollary and a parallel to that would be the implications for the vessel itself. Ship managers can't get on board their own vessels to inspect them. There's a lack of verification from class, from port state, from charterers. Even our own P&I clubs are unable to get on board to conduct the routine surveys we would do. So this process, this time is just ticking away in front of us. And for sure, if you have a demoralized crew with all those operational risks, then you have a heady, elevated risk environment. And I think it's only a matter of time before more serious COVID-related claims do come through, I believe. But right now, no, from our own particular club's perspective, our data doesn't show any particular spike. There was one in April related to crewing around FPSOs and infections in that area, but that has been largely taken care of now, and it is being managed. But we don't see the alarm or the mega trend coming through that might have been expected. But I would say, given the way this whole process and this whole pandemic is extending, I wouldn't discount such an event happening in the future.
Okay, I got this, and yeah, I understand the point. We expected something, yeah, as you said, we expected something to spike. Maybe we haven't seen that. Maybe it's early. Maybe we don't see that. We'll see. We'll see. The crisis, it will take months, if not years, to restore the situation back to normality. So we will see how it goes. But thank you for your feedback. I understand that. I would like to ask a quick one. If you have any sort of concerns with regards to remote inspections and surveys, you have concerns with shipping properly certified. It's part of keeping their insurance cover. Do you have any concerns with remote inspections? The classification societies have started introducing that. I'm not sure. I think this has not come to your attention yet, but do you have any concerns so far? Is anyone would like to quickly comment on this? I'm not saying you should. I'm just asking.
If you don't mind, I'll take that. From our perspective, it is an area of course, it's a concern. There's nothing to beat the presence, the physical presence of a surveyor on board, talking to, touching, smelling, feeling the ship, the operation, the processes there. So trying to replicate that in a remote way is a very, very difficult thing to do. But in the absence of being able to do that, then the remote survey is one solution of sorts. It is an imperfect one also, and therefore there are concerns that it's not capturing the kind of information in detail that you would like associated with a survey. But it is expedient to do it, and despite its imperfections, it is one way, one temporary way of resolving this issue. But I'm quite certain that once the situation improves, there will be an army of surveyors board vessels in a concerted way, because that's the nature of our business. It will happen.
Yeah. Okay. Now, in order to wrap up the panel, I would like to ask you to give me your feedback in less than a minute, each one of you. So I would like to ask, what should be in the top of our agenda as we move during this crisis and maybe post-pandemic crisis landscape, in order to improve the operational resilience of the industry. So what should be at the top of the agenda? What should be our key concern regarding operational resilience? Give me your thoughts. In less than, let's say, 60 seconds. I'm asking you to be brief, and I don't want you to have lengthy, statements about it. Elena.
I would say that what has been revealed over the last few months, obviously we need to focus on the well-being of the seafarers. It's the key to the shipping industry. We all need to keep in mind that equally operators and charterers and work together in order to maintain the well-being of the seafarers, and that would eventually avoid any major ship, incidents at sea. Obviously that goes in hand also with the cybersecurity. I would like to mention that because we have seen an increase and we have to keep the awareness even more during these unprecedented times. And as I said before, I think shipping industry has been very quick in adapting to the new environment post COVID outbreak.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Gordon.
And I think in terms of operational resilience, the shipping industry is incredibly resilient. It has, in actual fact, handled the crisis very well. But a lot of the issues that are causing a problem at the moment are caused by something that we've talked about for years and years and years, and that is sea blindness. And the shipping industry still needs to be better at explaining what it does and how it does it to the wider world, so that when we do end up in a situation like the situation we're in today, there is understanding on behalf of the authorities that crews need to get on and off ships, and that ships need to keep trading to keep the world turning. I mean, it's shipping that makes the world go round. It's shipping that is making sure that everybody can work from home, because they wouldn't have got their second monitor delivered to them if it hadn't come on a ship. It's all these things that the industry still needs to work on, because the wider world still doesn't know us well enough, and it still it doesn't understand how important we are to it. And I think that if we can conquer that, we can improve our operational resilience.
Yeah. Eva, your thoughts?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I would say that the well-being of seafarers, as Alina said, and the knowledge of all of the other industries, that we are doing the best we can. The whole shipping industry is doing the best they can. They have adapted very well in this situation and in this crisis, because it's a worldwide crisis. And indeed, we are making the world go round, as Gordon said, because we are providing to everybody through the ships, all products, etc. Needs to be, our flag needs to be not only mentioned between us and between panels, but especially to authorities and organizations like ITF, IMO, etc. They need to know what's the importance of shipping industry, and they need to know how important a seafarer is for its vessel.
Yeah, and John?
I think it was the judge in the Brown Jenkins versus Percy Dalton remarked, he said, trust is the foundation of trade. Well, I'd like to see a lot more trust in our business and the relationship between owners, charters, and indeed ship managers and their ships, class, flag, port state, all effectively taking a more trusting approach towards how ships are operated in this insane period. And hope then that their trust is justified by reciprocal, responsible, professional response from mariners in the most difficult times. Wishful thinking, but we wouldn't be in shipping if we weren't optimists. So I'm hopeful.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you very much for your contribution. I would like to thank all our viewers for their attendance through the course of these 2 days. I would like to also thank our sponsors for the support. And for those who missed part of what we streamed over the course of the 2 days, streams for both days will be available on the YouTube channel of SAFETY4SEA, and they will all the streams will remain there in the long run. So thank you all very much, and trust we see you in one of our future events. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.